Are you always hungry? Do you need lots of snacks just to get you through the day? Does it seem impossible for you to turn off your hunger? Do you feel that this is a really limiting factor in your ability to lose the amount of weight that you want to lose? What's up, everybody? This is Carl Piltz, and in this first video we're going to be talking about how hunger and appetite really work. In this video I'm going to answer 3 questions. The first one is, what makes me hungry? What are the mechanisms in my body that make me feel hungry and make me feel full? And it turns out that the amount of food in your stomach has very little to do with it. The second question is, why am I hungry so often? A lot of people have to do a lot of snacking throughout the day just to get through the day because their hunger keeps coming back and keeps coming back. Then the third question is, how can I turn off my hunger? How can I make it so that I'm only hungry when my body needs food? So let's start at the beginning. What controls our hunger and appetite? Hormones. Hormones control our appetite, and I'm going to show you how. So which hormones control our appetite? There are 2 of them. One is leptin and one is ghrelin. Leptin is a hormone that tells our body that we are full. Ghrelin is a hormone that tells our body, feed me. And these 2 hormones, leptin and ghrelin, have an inverse relationship. It's like they're on a seesaw. One's going up, the other's going down. The other's going up, the other's going down. And so leptin and ghrelin are constantly going up and down throughout the day, and this is what we feel as our appetite. When leptin is up, we're full. When ghrelin is up, we're hungry. And this cycle goes on several times throughout the day. Now, a very big point that I want to make clear right now is the strength of these hormones. These hormones are so incredibly strong. In fact, it's been shown that with rats, if you artificially hold leptin high, you can make that rat starve himself to death because he's not hungry. You can also artificially hold ghrelin high, and that rat will eat himself to death. That's how powerful these hormones are. And if all we have to fight these hormones is our willpower, then we're dead in the water. If you think that you can tell yourself, I won't eat, and that will keep you away from eating sweets, it won't be long before you're face deep in some Haagen-Dazs. And honestly, there's a much better way of doing it, and that is to learn how your appetite works. So let's start with how hunger is supposed to work. So here you're going about your day, and your body starts to need energy. So ghrelin goes up, and this makes you feel hungry. So what do? You eat a meal. Your meal causes leptin to go up, making you feel full, and ghrelin to go down, suppressing your appetite. Well, a couple hours later, when your body needs energy again, then leptin will come down and ghrelin will go up. And this causes your appetite to come back. So what do again? You eat another meal. Then the same thing happens. Leptin comes back up, making you feel full. Ghrelin goes back down, suppressing your appetite. And this is how it's supposed to work. Now, what's actually happening behind the scenes is that leptin and ghrelin are rising and falling. And when they rise, they're telling your brain a message. When leptin rises, it gives your brain the message that you're full. When ghrelin rises, it gives your brain the message that you're hungry. So these hormones are communicating a message to your brain. This becomes really important in just a second. So, how do we keep our hunger in check? We keep leptin high. Keeping leptin high keeps the I'm full signal going to your brain, and it prevents the feed me signal from getting to your brain. Well, how do we keep leptin high? There are a couple things that raise leptin and keep it high. Let's talk about those here. The first thing that will raise leptin is your stomach stretching. When your stomach stretches because it's full, then that will trigger leptin to rise. The only problem with that is it takes a lot of food in order to stretch your stomach in order to get that leptin high. And we don't necessarily want that. We don't want to have to eat a ton of calories just to get leptin high. The second thing that raises leptin are fat cells. Fat cells themselves produce leptin. Each fat cell that you have produces leptin. So, the more fat cells that you have, the higher your leptin will rise. And this has an evolutionary reason. If hunter-gatherers gained too much fat, then they would be slow. They wouldn't be able to hunt food, and they wouldn't be able to run away from danger. This makes for a dead caveman. So with this design, if we have enough energy stored on our bodies already, it would raise leptin so that we were no longer hungry and so we didn't take in any more calories through food. Now the third thing that will make leptin rise are meals containing fat. See, fat is made up of fatty acids. When you look at the fat on a piece of ribeye and you see that white stuff, that's actually a chain of individual fatty acids chained together. Some of them are caprylic acid, butyric acid, palmitic acid. Those are all fatty acids, and string them together and they make what we know as fat. And a bunch of these fatty acids cause a direct rise in leptin when we eat them. That's why when we eat a meal that has a lot of fat in it, we feel full, because these fatty acids cause leptin to rise. So fat makes us feel full. And we've been told forever that we should be eating low-fat meals, when fat is the thing that controls our appetite. Low-fat diets are taking away this important appetite suppressant. And what I'm about to show you is that these low-fat diets are causing our appetites to completely malfunction. And it's because of what we have been replacing the fat in our diets with. So, to recap real quick, our hunger should be regulated if we, 1, eat until our stomach stretches. Except this is not really what we want because this would take a good amount of calories. Number 2, if we have a lot of stored body fat. But this is the opposite of what we want. We're trying to lose body fat. And number 3, if we eat meals containing fat. Now, a lot of people are going to be asking, I thought fat was bad for me. Stay tuned for that. Turns out that the recommendations that we've been getting out of the government, out of the American Heart Association, and all of our doctors has been based on shaky science and half-truths. So that's how my appetite is supposed to work. But how is my appetite actually working right now? You remember how leptin and ghrelin are constantly rising and falling, telling your brain, I'm full, I'm hungry, I'm full, I'm hungry. When leptin is high, it is telling your brain that you're full. But the really important part is how leptin is doing that. And it has to do with volume and frequency. So let's talk about that for a little bit. This is how leptin is supposed to signal to your brain. Here we have a graph. The horizontal axis is time. So the farther to the right you go, the more time has elapsed. The vertical axis is leptin's signal intensity. So you can look at that as volume. The higher you go up, the louder leptin's signal. In between the green dotted lines, that is the healthy leptin range. That is the range that our body wants leptin to stay. In that range, our brain can completely understand what leptin and ghrelin are saying. And this black curve is our leptin that has slowly been coming down since our last meal. So now it's getting to the bottom of that healthy range, so now we're getting hungry. So what do? We eat a meal. If we eat a proper meal that has a little bit of fat in it, then our leptin will rise by the appropriate amount, still staying within this healthy leptin range, and then after several hours, after 5 to 6 hours, leptin will fall again and we'll become hungry, but not until close to 5 or 6 hours. And this healthy range, if leptin stays within this healthy range, our brain can completely understand what leptin is trying to say. It's not too loud. At this volume, your brain can hear leptin loud and clear. But for most of us, this is not how leptin is working right now. And the reason is sugar and white carbohydrates. Now let's take a look at what happens when we eat sugar and white carbohydrates and how it affects leptin. When we eat sugar and white carbohydrates, those carbohydrates digest incredibly quickly, and it causes a rise in leptin. But because of the speed that those digest, it not only causes leptin to rise, but it causes a leptin spike. Leptin rises too high and too quickly. So let's go back to this graph and see how sugar and white carbohydrates, how they affect leptin. So here we're back at the same graph, and we have leptin coming down over time since our last meal. But now we're going to eat a meal that contains sugar and white carbohydrates. And as soon as we eat that meal, those carbohydrates get digested and our leptin will spike. Not only will leptin spike, but then it will tank right away, kind of like your blood sugar crashes. And we'll see later, these two are very related. But when your leptin crashes, now your leptin is low again. And so you feel hungry. And so what do? Let's say you grab a sugary snack. Say you grab a soda or a cookie. That's full of sugar and quickly digesting carbohydrates. So your leptin will spike again. And your leptin will crash again. So now it's probably about time for a meal. So you eat a meal, and let's say it's full of sugar and white carbohydrates. Then your leptin will spike again. And it will crash again. And this will go on time and again throughout the day. Now what I'll show you in later videos is how this directly affects weight. Because honestly, it's not pretty. But back to leptin. This blue line, where leptin spikes to, at this intensity of leptin signal, or at this volume, leptin is basically screaming at your brain over and over again. It's like a fire alarm that keeps going off and going off and going off. Now I have a question for you. Let's say you're in that situation. Let's say you're at the office and a fire alarm goes off. You know there's not a fire. You know it's just a test. But the alarm keeps blaring and blaring and blaring and blaring. What do you learn to do? You learn to tune it out. And that's exactly what your brain learns to do. If leptin is spiking and spiking and spiking to a level where it is just screaming and screaming and screaming at your brain, eventually your brain does what you would do. Put on some headphones. You learn to ignore it. And that's what your brain learns to do. Because of the high volume and repetition of leptin signal, because of the sugar and white carbohydrates that we're eating, your brain becomes what's called resistant to leptin, meaning it no longer listens to leptin signal. If you've ever studied diabetes, you know that the same thing happens with insulin. Insulin's job is to get that sugar into your cells. If we keep hitting our body with a bunch of blood sugar spikes caused by sugar and white carbohydrates, eventually your cells stop listening to insulin. And what you've now developed is insulin resistance. And that leads to diabetes. The same thing will happen to leptin. Your brain will become resistant to leptin signal. And what we have done is effectively destroyed our brain's ability to shut off our hunger. The good news is that we can reset this. We can make our brains sensitive to leptin again. So how do we do this? How do we reset our appetite? Like I just said, we reset our brain's sensitivity to leptin. How do we do this? By reducing the frequency and volume of leptin signaling. We need to go back to this graph. We need to go back to this situation where when we eat a meal, our leptin is rising the appropriate amount, not too high. And we also want leptin to stay high for a long period of time, 4, 5, 6 hours before we need another meal. If we can keep our leptin here, then our brain will be able to hear leptin signal loud and clear, and this will restore the proper operation of our appetite. So how do we do this? How do we reset leptin sensitivity in our brain? The first thing is to avoid those carbohydrates that cause those spikes in leptin. We need to avoid sugar, white carbs, processed carbs, all that. These carbohydrates cause spikes in leptin, and that spike is way too loud of a signal for our brain to hear. It eventually causes the brain to become resistant to leptin signaling, and from then on, our hunger and appetite are shot. The second thing is to add healthy fats to our meals. The fatty acids in these fats raise leptin the right amount. This will keep our brain sensitive to leptin. It will keep the leptin signal up so that our brain shuts off hunger, and we will be full for much, much longer. So what kinds of fat? Some of my favorites are avocado, cheese, I eat a ton of nuts, butter, coconut oil, full-fat dairy, healthy oils like olive oil, those kinds of foods. But I know a lot of you are asking, isn't fat bad for us? Doesn't fat clog our arteries? It's time for you to do a little bit of homework. In my next video, I talk about the history of cholesterol guidelines in America today and how they came about. Did you know that the committee who comes up with our cholesterol guidelines that our government pushes to our doctors? In that committee, the chairman, along with 8 out of 9 committee members, were being paid by 7 to 10 pharmaceutical companies? Yeah, if that doesn't make you mad, I don't know what will. But I'll also give you a list of MDs and PhDs who are all talking about the same thing, and that is that the science is now showing that fat, cholesterol, and saturated fats are not the villains that they've been made to be. Also included is a guide by one of those doctors on what blood tests you should actually be getting, how to interpret those results, and how to work with your doctor to make sure that you're doing what you need to do in order to stay healthy. So the question remains, does fat make us fat? The answer is no. Fat does not make us fat. After seeing how leptin works, it is very clear that our bodies were designed to use fat to keep us from gaining weight. Fat cells cause a rise in leptin. This was so that the cavemen did not gain too much weight. Eating meals with fat in them causes a direct rise in leptin. This is all a means to prevent us from gaining weight. Now you do have to watch overall calories. If you eat 4,000 calories of anything, you're going to gain weight. But if you eat the right amount of calories, and a good portion of those come from fat, then you will not gain weight. Sugar and white carbohydrates are the main villains behind our obesity epidemic. In my next video, I show you exactly how and how to avoid this. So let's recap. How do we reset our appetites? We do that by resetting our brain's sensitivity to leptin. We want our brains to get the message that we are full. So how do we do that? First thing is to avoid sugar and white carbohydrates. They cause leptin spikes, which causes our brain to eventually stop listening to leptin, so we never feel full. The second thing is adding fat to our meal. Fatty acids in the fat that we eat cause leptin to rise the correct amount, and so our brains will get the "I'm full" signal. This will make us feel full much, much longer. What kinds of fats? Avocados, cheese, nuts, butter, coconut oil, all that stuff. To ease your concerns of how this will impact your health, make sure you watch my next video where I show you how the new science is showing us that cholesterol, fat, and saturated fat are very good for us, so that you can start eating the foods that are going to help you lose weight. One thing I want to warn you about is that resetting your appetite takes time. It could take 2 to 3 weeks for your brain to become sensitive to leptin again. So be patient. During this time, keep snacking on foods that are going to keep you full. Foods that have fat like nuts, cheese, and olives. Feel free to eat these until you are no longer hungry. In between your meals, add, a 1/4 cup of nuts or an ounce of cheese and snack so that you're not hungry. After a little while, your appetite will begin to reset and you will need to snack less and less. You can also add in some fruit. Just make sure that it's the high fiber fruit like apples, pears, and oranges, not bananas or pineapples or watermelon. And whatever you do, stay away from the vending machines. They have nothing good for you. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. Click on over to the next video to learn about cholesterol.